Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Garabedian from the Armenian National Committee Western Region, and I'm joined tonight by Vicken Sonentz-Papazian, the chairman of the Armenian National Committee Western Region. Vicken, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
So we're going to be talking about a very important subject, the upcoming elections on November 4th, and the importance on Armenian American issues and why it's so significant. So the two candidates obviously running are Senator Obama and Senator McCain, and they've both spoken out on the Armenian genocide. But first, let's talk a little bit about the elections. Why is it such a contested election? Why is it it's probably going to be the most historic election of our time that we've seen?
I think first and foremost, there's huge changes going on in the world. For the most part, in the last 6-7 years, you've seen a lot of focus and attention being drawn to U.S. involvement in overseas conflicts. Mainly Iraq and to a lesser extent Afghanistan, the cost in American lives, the cost in taxpayer money, and that's now been eclipsed by the serious economic strains we see in the world economy. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of fear out there, domestically and abroad, about what's to come. So everyone feels that if it's not handled correctly, we can see perhaps a decade or more of real problems for both Americans and people around the world. And
do you think the current economic crisis has hurt McCain's chances of becoming the next president?
I think there's no doubt that it doesn't pay at this point to be a Republican, because the Republican administration has presided over the administration, the presidency in the past 8 years, and during those 8 years we've seen a serious switch from a surplus to an enormous deficit, and most recently bank failures and huge problems for the big business and the economic sector, both in the United States and globally.
So let's talk a little bit about the Armenian issue. And we're in California, and California is home to one of the largest Armenian populations in the world. What have they, Senator Obama and Senator McCain, how have they spoken out against, in support or against the Armenian genocide resolution? President Reagan was the last president to acknowledge the Armenian genocide and to state it as a historical fact. What's the current status with that? What's going to happen with a new administration?
Okay. Well, let's talk a little about President Reagan's
we can break up that question.
Comment made in the early 1980s. He referred to the Armenian experience correctly as genocide, because it is a genocide. To refer to it as something else doesn't properly characterize the events of the Armenian experience at that point. It's a genocide. The term genocide was coined because of the Armenian experience. It was coined by Raphael Lemkin in the late 20s, early 30s, when he examined what happened to the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. He felt that this is an international crime. The international community wasn't prepared at that time to adopt that position. It wasn't only until after the Holocaust that they did adopt the idea that the extermination of a people centrally masterminded is a crime against humanity and should be termed genocide. So putting that aside for a second, in 1982, I believe, or in 1981, Ronald Reagan referred to the Armenian genocide. He was the last president to put the words Armenian and genocide next to each other. Since then, successive presidents, let's say George Bush Sr., President Clinton, George Bush, the president, have referred to the tragic sufferings of the Armenians, have described the genocide for the most part, but they haven't used the word genocide. And the devil's in the details when it comes to that. Going back to the 1980s, what happened that really drew the attention of the Armenian American community was in 1982, the State Department put out a bulletin, and it talked about Armenian terrorism. And in the bulletin, the State Department sponsored publication, at the very end, there was a small addition to the article that said almost gratuitously that the State Department doesn't necessarily endorsed the idea that the Armenians were victims of genocide. That had never been stated before. The author of the piece later, in the discussions with Armenians, said that I didn't add that. The State Department put that in there after the fact. that caused a lot of Armenian groups working in Washington, D.C., the ANC included, to go to the State Department and say, we want clarification on this. And that's what really started this movement in Washington, D.C. to properly characterize the Armenian genocide as genocide. It really was spurned, first and foremost, by the State Department's equivocating on the issue of genocide. Now, fast-forwarding a little, mid-1980s, John McCain was a member of Congress, the House of Representatives. He was a member of the Armed Services Committee. I was in Washington, D.C. during those years. And I remember distinctly the Armed Services Committee, especially members of the Armed Services Committee, were opposed to the Armenian Genocide Resolution, the passage for the Armenian Genocide Resolution. It included Congressman Sonny Callahan and some senior members of that committee, and it also included John McCain. So they would send what they call dear colleagues around to other members of Congress, urging the defeat of the resolution. And John McCain's signature was on that piece of paper on numerous occasions, dear colleagues, to defeat the Armenian Genocide Resolution. And that's going back more than 2 decades, about 23 years. So John McCain, being in Congress longer, has a longer track record, good or bad, on the Armenian genocide issue.
And does Governor Palin have any stance on the Armenian genocide? Has she been briefed on the Armenian genocide at all? You know,
it's hard to say. I know that there is a small and fairly vocal Armenian community in Alaska going way back. In fact, funny enough, my uncle, as a young attorney in the early 1960s, a graduate of Boston University Law School, became a DA in Alaska. It became a state at that time, and because they needed judges, was actually a judge in Alaska, one of the first Armenian judges, and he was barely out of law school because they needed judges. So by that, I just want to illustrate the fact that there has been an Armenian presence in Alaska. Now, whether Governor Palin has any kind of track record on the Armenian genocide, I seriously doubt. I mean, it's not really known to us. I don't think that's one of her big priorities.
Right. And so let's talk about Senator Obama and Senator Biden. They've both been very vocal on Armenian issues, whether it's the genocide or most recently being the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Biden presided over the confirmation hearings of Marie Yovanovitch, the current ambassador from the United States to Armenia. Here we have two very vocal members of Congress speaking out on Armenian issues. How is this going to help us should they be elected to?
Well, one thing for sure with Senator Biden, you won't have to educate him.
Right.
He's been in Congress since he was a very young man. And as a member of the Senate, and he's been very well versed on the issue of the Armenian genocide. He's been very supportive. He's held a lot of leadership positions over the years, and he hasn't kind of been intimidated by pressure from lobbying groups, from the Pentagon, from the Turkish lobby, to somehow equivocate on the Armenian genocide issue. So obviously, he's not a shrinking violet, as they say, when it comes to the Armenian genocide issue. And there's a tendency among senators, as opposed to members of the House of Representatives, to be a little more moderate and conservative in the positions they take. And Joe Biden hasn't fallen into that pattern. He has been very vocal on the Armenian genocide. Senator Obama, obviously much newer to the U.S. Senate, but in the short time he's been there, has taken the right position on the Armenian genocide, has been critical of the State Department for the way that they treated Ambassador Evans, has openly, frankly, and without hesitation spoken about the Armenian genocide. And we hope that continues as president.